Great rewards don't wait, so why should you? Through the Invigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all of your Invigor hybrid canola by November 14th. Talk to your retailer. Terms and conditions apply.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your work day. And, of course, also a shout-out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. And today we will have a bonus segment for the RealAg Issues Panel as well. Today's show is brought to you by Phospholutions and RhizoSorb. Now, RhizoSorb is redefining what growers expect from phosphate fertilizer. It's backed by data and built for performance. RhizoSorb helps reduce phosphorus losses, improves uptake, and most importantly here, it boosts ROI without increasing the input cost, which is also a massive factor for you as well. Join the next wave of growers switching to the next generation of phosphorus fertilizers by visiting phospholutions.com. And speaking of course, today's show sponsor, Phospholutions, we're going to be talking to Craig Dick of Phospholutions about some of the things that they are doing. Big launch for the 2026 season in Western Canada. Okay, today on the show, we've got Craig Dick from Phospholutions as well. We got the RealAg Issues Panel. We got Tyler McCann, Managing Director at CAPI, as well as Kelvin Heppner from RealAgriculture. We've got both central banks in Canada and the U.S. making decisions on interest rates. What does that mean? We've got Prime Minister Carney going down to Mexico to talk trade with President Sheinbaum. We've also got President Trump going to the UK. We've got some issues around farm policy and farm profitability we're definitely going to discuss. We've got a lot of different paths to go down here today. We also had a CAPI webinar as well this week with Real Agriculture, which provided some interesting thoughts from David Coletto of Abacus Data as well. So we got a lot of different ways to go with the show here today. We'll try to fit as much of it in as possible. And what doesn't get squeezed into the show will, of course, be in that bonus segment. If you have a feedback on today's program, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Let's get started with the RealAg Issues Panel right after this quick break, brought to you by today, Phospholutions.
It is time for today's product spotlight. Jen Dale, product manager with Proven Canola Seed. What are the top priorities for the Proven brand when you're developing these new canola hybrids?
It really comes down to three things: yield, disease resistance, and the harvestability, flexibility.
What can growers dig into, look for when they're planning their seed purchases this fall, and of course planning for the spring seeding season?
We have three new hybrids that we're really excited about for this 2026 season. PV662 LCM. It's a Liberty Link multi-genic clubroot, ideal for those high-pressure clubroot areas of northern Alberta. Where we move into the NTAC technology, the PV663 LCN combines the clubroot resistance with NTAC. Again, is a great fit for any of those straight-cut acres across Western Canada. And then also PV664 LCN. It's a full-season option with both clubroot and blackleg resistance. Again, with that guarantee of the NTAC that you know that it's going to stand for your harvest needs. The best place to get any of the hybrid information is provenseed.ca.
Soil health is under pressure, but Real Solutions start below the surface. Black Earth offers a full suite of humic solutions, from high-purity granules to powder, liquid, and soluble formulations, all powered by pure Humulite. Formulated for performance, backed by consistency, trusted by growers worldwide from one of the world's rarest reserves. Grow stronger with the power of Black Earth Humulite. Learn more from Mine to Market at blackearth.com.
Let's get fired up here with the RealAg Issues Panel. There is a lot that happened this week, and I was not here last Friday. I was very jealous. You can just picture me screaming at the windshield as I was driving back from Soyuz, BC, and in terms of some of the things the panel said or didn't say, so we're going to put him on the hot seat here this afternoon. Joining us is, of course, Kelvin Heppner, coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. We're missing Lyndsey today, though. So again, we'll have to imagine, I guess, her screaming at the windshield as listening to, or maybe Tyler will share Lyndsey's perspective on the panel today.
Yeah, there you go. It is always interesting when you're used to being on a show, right? And you're hearing the conversation. You start to, yeah, well, okay, wait a minute, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm not on the show. I'm listening to the podcast. It is you got. Meanwhile, your spouse is looking at you, and she's sort of like, what are you doing? What do you do? Can you be please? This is like yelling at a sports game, like at a football on the couch at what's going on in the football game. Now we're doing it with political commentary. Also joining us is Tyler McCann. He's the managing director at the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, better known as CAPI. Tyler, great to have you here.
It is great to be back, Shaun. And Kelvin, I'm not sure I can quite put myself in Lyndsey's shoes. I hope that that's not the bar being set for me today. I'm not sure I'm quite as lively as Lyndsey is, and her and I often do see the world a little bit different, so we'll miss her perspective today.
Yeah, she's...
Shaun, welcome back to the Issues Panel. It was good for you to show up today.
Yeah, I know. I've been negating my responsibilities. Okay, Kelvin, let's dig in here. Let's start with trade. I think a really good trip, at least from an intent perspective for sure, for Prime Minister Carney to be meeting with President Sheinbaum in Mexico. I've always found it kind of curious that, we've got this three-way trade deal, the CUSMA agreement or USMCA between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. And it's so U.S. focused because it's the largest economy out of the three, right? And so it's Canada, U.S., Mexico, U.S., and we don't hear a lot about Canada, Mexico. What was your thoughts on what we saw this week on that trip?
Yeah, I think a lot of this was symbolic and maybe more the kind of soft type of relationship building, not necessarily hard deals and big specific things that we saw coming out of this trip, but certainly the deepening of ties and trying to deepen that relationship. I believe it was Stephen Chase in the Globe and Mail described it as intended to signal the era of indifference in the Canada-Mexico relationship is over. And so I think that there was that show of unity, that show that they are, that Canada and Mexico are looking to do more trade with each other too. It's not just about Canada, US or Mexico, US. I watched the wrap-up press conference though yesterday, and it did seem like, I'm not sure if it was the language issue with the mix of French, Spanish, and English, but Prime Minister Carney seemed a little bit less sharp than he normally does, and there was a tough question thrown at them, asking whether they had committed to not throwing each other under the bus again, like supposedly happened during the original USMCA CUSMA negotiations, and whether they would commit to not doing that this time when or if the Trump administration tries to wedge them. There's a bit of an awkward answer to that where they both said basically that we agree to cooperate, we will do what's best for our country, that kind of thing, but not a clear commitment to saying, no, we won't throw the other under the bus if it comes down to it. So a bit of an awkward end, but yeah, I think overall a productive, meaningful trip. I do wonder too whether they timed it when President Trump was out of the continent on purpose or not.
Yeah, that was my question to Tyler. I thought the timing was a little bit convenient. Obviously, the president was over in the UK, meeting with Prime Minister Starmer and King Charles, and trying to put the final touches on that trade arrangement. Tyler, do you think that was on purpose, that timing?
Maybe not. Again, sometimes it's hard to know. There's lots of moving parts around when people are going where and who knows what and how that all plays out. Again, I think it's good that Carney has gone. Again, that relationship is not often a huge priority, and you don't usually see the Canadian government making a significant effort to build relationships with Mexico. I think we take it for granted. But I want to go back to the comment I made a minute ago about countries not throwing each other's under the bus. Again, I think that we would expect that we would not want the Prime Minister to sacrifice Canadian interests in order to serve Mexico. And I think it's reasonable to expect that the Mexicans aren't going to sacrifice their interests at all. What we need to do is to continue to try and find ways that kind of get good outcomes for everybody that's involved. But, at the end of the day, if Canada needs to do what Canada needs to do to get a better deal, and that may not work for Mexico, I think I know what position I would want the prime minister to take at that time. The other thing that is worth highlighting is that agriculture did focus relatively heavily in the meetings and in the action plan that's there. And the prime minister is at CPKC rail yard today, where I think actually it's a grain shipment that they're going to be looking at when he's there. So always good for agriculture to be a little bit higher priority. And a reminder that in a lot of the trading relationships in the Indo-Pacific in particular, agriculture really is front and center of what Canada is doing around the world, and good not to forget that.
Of course, the CPKC is pitched as the first North American railway, and as one good friend taught me a number of years ago, from Northgate, Saskatchewan, it is straight downhill all the way to Mexico. So, Kelvin, what were you going to say?
I thought Carney had a good answer too. I believe it was a Bloomberg Mexico reporter that asked what kind of specific deals were arranged in this meeting between leaders. And Carney said those aren't the type of deals that Canada does. Our government is about getting out of the way of the market and getting out of the way, and that's certainly the environment we're seeing all over the world right now. That's the type of deals that Trump is signing or announcing with other countries. And I thought Carney had a pretty strong answer on that question, basically saying we're not about dictating trade and having our government run X, we're going to buy X number or X dollars worth of certain commodities from Mexico, that type of thing. We're about letting the market decide that. And I think that was an answer that our agriculture stakeholders would appreciate.
So the answer to that.
Sorry.
That was a long-winded answer to him. He probably should have just said no.
But again, I think it's not just no, right? Because when you just say no, it sounds like they didn't do something. It's not no, it's like I reject the premise of your question because that's not the way we do business. And I think if you look at the contortions that the UK government went into this week with Trump visiting and trying to kind of figure out how do you actually live up to this kind of craziness that the US president is demanding, I think I'm glad that we have a prime minister that's not trying to insert himself into the middle of business. It's just not the way these things should work.
But also, look, you got to don't put your thoughts into Starmer's head. He's fighting for his political life, right? And so he is trying to show that he is doing things as well. So this isn't just a Trump motive. Starmer is very motivated to try to appear like he has moved UK into a better position from a trade perspective with the United States relative, of course, post-Brexit, and trying to do things for the UK economy, because Nigel Farage looks to be very much the front runner to be the next prime minister of the United Kingdom.
Again, that's a complicated domestic political dynamic. Happy to spend a lot of time talking about UK politics, but the reality is that I don't think a better deal with the United States is Starmer's path to re-election or surviving even his own internal party dynamics. Just as I don't think at the end of the day, it's almost like the opposite though. Mexico is not the path that Carney's going to get to for his survival either. He does need that deal with the United States. He will be judged by that. And where I think it remains to be seen how far Carney's going to be able to go on that. It was also interesting to see this kind of refocus on China. We had our canola sector meeting with the Prime Minister and Scott Moe, Saskatchewan Premier, and Cody Bloys and the Agriculture Minister and others in Ottawa this week. I think a bit of an effort there to try and repair that relationship as well. But a reminder that, again, as much as that U.S. relationship is really what matters, the Prime Minister is doing what he can to navigate around that in Mexico and China.
I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody that's been in the agricultural trade game for a long time. I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, all this talk about, Canada, Mexico, Canada, Europe, Canada, UK, Canada, Asia, all that is great, but all of that is incrementally, it's additionality to what Canada can do with the US. None of that, even in totality, replaces the trading relationship and so that at the end of the day, that's really what matters to Carney, is getting that Kuzma agreement, whatever the future 2.0 or whatever, getting that across the line. That is, if that doesn't happen, Canada's got some really big problems.
And we saw the U.S. and Mexico both start their renegotiation consultations.
Yeah,
for that Kuzma review.
Canada has today as well.
Oh, there you go. So now Canada's jumped on that bandwagon. But again, a really good example of, this is kind of window dressing. The real work looks like it will be next year when kind of the sleeves get rolled up and the negotiations really start to happen.
Yeah. It was, it was interesting. The Globe had a story, Kelvin, about the U.S. ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra. He made a comment about the U.S. was looking for a bigger deal. They wanted defense spending wrapped into it, but he didn't provide exactly what the holdup was. Did that actually happen? Like he didn't really mention Prime Minister Carney in some of his comments, but he was just talking from a maybe 500,000 foot view. I thought that was interesting because that's kind of the way that Carney's been talking. So clearly there's something amiss, or maybe just some positioning. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, the ambassador has brought that up a couple times, I believe, in the last week or two, and Carney was asked about that yesterday as well in that press conference, and he basically said, "Oh, we want a bigger deal too. Let's talk," kind of thing, and he was actually quite said some nice things about the U.S. ambassador, saying that he's doing a nice job for the U.S. and that type of thing. So he was quite complimentary, and I think that type of signal from the ambassador bodes well for Canada and the renegotiation or review of CUSMA USMCA.
Yeah. Except to my reading between the lines is that there's a difference in the big deal that the U.S. wants and the big deal that Canada wants. Canada wants a big deal that protects the preferential market access that we have under CUSMA. And it sounds like the U.S. wants a big deal that increases tariffs pretty substantially, potentially, on Canadian exports. And so I think we're talking about two very different big deals. And I'm sure that if we were ready to agree to a 10 or 15% across the board tariff, the U.S. would sign a pretty big deal too. But again, I think it's probably in Canada's interest that Canada does take the time to get a deal that hopefully avoids that pain and suffering that the U.S. wants to impose.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point in the sense that, when there was a renegotiation of NAFTA, there was a bunch of lanes that were really contentious and they were trying to sort out. Okay, softwood lumber and autos and dairy and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is in this one, probably the front runner to be the big issue that will be the major stumbling block is what is going to be that flat tariff. Is it going to be like others that are 15 to 20%? Is it going to be like a 5%? Is it going to be a 10%? The odds are you wouldn't think it's going to be, if it's zero, that's a massive win for Canada. And you may not want to give up what you got to give up in order to get the zero. You may be better off for Canada to have a 5 or a 10 than have to, give up some of the things they're going to be asked to give up. So that is going to be, pay attention to that, everybody. That is going to be the big thing. Kelvin, before we take a break, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think what Hoekstra is referring to also is commitments to North American missile defense and things like that too, when he talks about a big deal and Canada bringing more to the table.
Yeah, good points. Okay, well, we're going to be right back on RealAg Radio. When we come back, the panel's they're going to have a coffee, they're going to take a bit of a break, maybe run to the bathroom. We're going to be hearing from Craig Dick. He is going to talk about today's show sponsor. He is with Phospholutions. They got a great new product that's hitting the Canadian market, RhizoSorb, and we'll be back with Craig right after this.
Maizex Seeds is 100% focused on Canadian farmers because Canadian agriculture deserves a national seed company rooted right here at home. Known for high-performance grain, silage, and grazing corn, Maizex is now bringing soybeans. And, new for 2026, Maizex canola to farmers in Western Canada. Maizex is committed to helping you get more from every acre, field by field. Crush it with Maizex by visiting maizex.com today to connect with your local Maizex Seeds representative.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola, it's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, channel 147, Sirius XM. I am Lyndsey Smith, and it is time for today's Product Spotlight. Joining me now, it's Craig Dick. He's VP of Sales and Marketing for Phospholutions. How are you, Craig?
Doing great.
All right, we've got an exciting product to talk about today. Tell me, what is RhizoSorb and what makes it so different from traditional phosphate fertilizers?
Well, RhizoSorb 839.0 is the next generation dry phosphate fertilizer meant to replace MAP and DAP. Our RhizoSorb technology is incorporated into traditional manufacturing, which results in a finished granule that will improve phosphate use efficiency, will reduce your input costs while maintaining your crop yields.
Now, how does RhizoSorb help increase yields and still use less phosphorus?
Phosphate is adsorbed onto the surface of RhizoSorb during granulation, and that keeps the phosphorus from tying up in your soil when it's applied to the fields. RhizoSorb controls the release of phosphorus based on plant needs rather than environmental conditions like MAP or DAP. RhizoSorb reduces soil tie-up and environmental loss by keeping more of what's available to the plant throughout the growing season. And because a higher percentage of phosphate from RhizoSorb gets used by the plant rather than tied up in the soil, less phosphorus can be applied while maintaining soil and plant phosphate levels, ensuring optimum yields.
So now, is this a biological product or a similar product? How should we sort of think about what RhizoSorb actually is?
No, RhizoSorb is not a biological. It is a phosphorus fertilizer enhancer that uses a patented mineral technology to improve phosphorus availability and efficiency in the soil. And unlike biologicals, which rely on living microbes, RhizoSorb works on a plant-driven release mechanism, keeping more of it in a plant-available form and reducing phosphorus tie-up.
So now, it's always a big question about performance of any product that's being evaluated. How has RhizoSorb performed in real-world trials? What kind of results can producers anticipate seeing in the field?
Yeah, we've had over 9 years of development of this technology with nearly 600 trials of small plot and large-scale on-farm trials, which demonstrate that RhizoSorb allows growers to use as much as 50% less phosphorus without compromising yields in major row crops such as corn and soybeans. Our multi-year, multi-location replicated research trials have demonstrated that RhizoSorb at reduced application rates maintains or increases yields without lowering soil phosphorus levels. And in this past year, we've just added a number of wheat trials as well as other small grains that you may find in Canada.
Now, input costs, of course, climbing, crop prices not maybe keeping pace, and so that does pinch margins. How can a product like RhizoSorb help growers get more value from the phosphate fertilizer that they add and impact their ROI?
Yeah, so although our cost per ton is higher, RhizoSorb is cheaper per acre than MAP. Since RhizoSorb is more efficient, we'll use less fertilizer to deliver the same amount of phosphorus to the crop. On average, growers should save $5 to $7 per acre, and RhizoSorb has a demonstrated yield increase of around 3 to 5 bushels. And for most growers, that should generate an ROI of about $20 per acre compared to MAP.
Okay. Now, why would you say now is the right time to switch to a product like RhizoSorb?
Yeah, currently, phosphorus fertilizers are at an all-time high, and compared to the grain prices, it makes margins extremely tight. And so right now there's a lot of global volatility around the phosphate markets. There's not a lot of imports coming into North America. And so, this is really starting to be our, second year of this type of scenario. And I don't know if growers can really rely on the old cost-cutting methods of just simply using less fertilizer. And so in a market like we are now where every bushel counts, RhizoSorb allows those growers to maximize phosphorus uptake by the plant at a lower cost per acre. And so it's really a way that helps them maintain their yields while reducing that fertilizer expense.
Now, I'm sure there are listeners out there with plenty of questions or want to know more on where they can find this product. Where can they go to learn more? Who can they get in touch with to try out RhizoSorb on their farm?
Yeah, growers and retailers alike can learn about the potential savings from RhizoSorb by going to our website at phospholutions.com, where there's a grower calculator where they can put in their use rates and their acreage. and see how much savings that they will have. There's also additional information on our website with trial results, and they can locate one of our regional sales managers to learn more about the product. And we'd encourage you to reach out through the website and get a hold of us if you have more questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Craig, for joining me here on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lyndsey. Great to be here.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
At Proven Seed, we know that farming in Western Canada doesn't just teach us, it shapes us. Here we face challenges with resilience, innovation, and grit born from decades of experience. We battle the conditions again and again because growing crops here isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We're raised to adapt just like you, with varieties grown specifically for your local conditions. Visit provenseed.ca/raised to adapt to hear our story.
Whether you're running a farm operation, in a career within an organization, starting your own business, looking for your dream job, operating a company in agri-food, or want to hone your overall life skills, this conference is for you. Celebrating over 10 years of bringing women in ag and food together, join the Advancing Women Conference in Niagara Falls on November 23rd, 24th, and 25th. Visit advancingwomenconference.ca for more information and to register.
RhizoSorb is redefining what growers expect from phosphate fertilizer. Backed by data and built for performance, RhizoSorb helps reduce phosphorus losses, improves uptakes, and of course, it boosts ROI without increasing input costs, which is something I know you were very concerned about in 2026. Join the next wave of growers switching to the next generation of phosphorus fertilizers by visiting Phospholutions.com. Make sure you ask your local retailer about RhizoSorb. Okay, we got a great RealAg Issues panel here. Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, as well as Tyler McCann of CAPI. Okay, we did a webinar together, CAPI and RealAgriculture, earlier this week, and we talked about, okay, what is going to happen with the return of Parliament? Hopefully something. And Tyler, we opened up, I guess, first of all, what was your biggest takeaway from that webinar?
Well, part of it was that the relationship between CAPI and RealAg is bringing really great content to people across Canadian agriculture policy, and encourage everybody to sign up and participate and attend these things. But you know, one of my big takeaways was that we're in a different dynamic going into this parliament, and ministers are going to be held accountable for their actions. And I think it says something that we're not seeing that much action on ag issues.
Kelvin, that's not good. We want action, don't we?
There's all kinds of places we want action, and Carney talked about action a lot during the election campaign again, but we continue to see, well, now the budget, instead of last week we were speculating maybe in October we'd see the budget, and that was the expectation. Now it's November. Keeps getting kicked further down the road on a lot of these things in terms of action, and so yeah, and we heard David Coletto on the webinar too talk about he as an outsider to our ag bubble sees potential for government to move in the agriculture area in this space, and sees potential for economic activity in this area to grow and that type of thing. And yeah, it's a question of, I guess, when or what is going to drive that. Where is the urgency going to come from?
Yeah, and he did address some of the challenges of, like, say that you guys talked about the infrastructure announcement last week on the issues panel, right? And some of those projects are, or all of them are already in motion. Like it's sort of like, just like this isn't new, and we're pretending it's new. And Coletto talked about, there's issues that are like now, they're now problems. And infrastructure is something, or, anything in the investment area is something that's like way out. And so people will have lack of patience. So one of the, Coletto used a bit of a comparison or a metaphor to talk about, this challenge for the government. Here's that audio from the webinar from this week.
The government's going to have to find a way to thread the needle of pushing an agenda of big, radical, bold action, while at the same time signaling to people, like, we've got your back. We know you're going through some difficult times, and what are they going to do to help people? Because if you just tell people, hold on,
Yeah.
Analogy I've been using, Shaun, is like, imagine I invited you and everybody listening and watching over to my house for Thanksgiving. And I pulled out this raw turkey and I put it on the counter and I started like dressing it. And I said, this is going to be the best turkey ever. But come back in 10 years because it's going to take that long to cook. You're going to like be left there so unsatisfied and so impatient that you're going to probably dislike me and never come back to my house again. That's kind of what's going on when it comes to these big projects, is you're basically asking people to wait a long time to see to reap the benefits. And I don't think people have that much patience.
That's David Coletto, the CEO of Abacus Data. I don't know, Kelvin, I envision David Coletto being an amazing cook of a turkey. So I don't know. He may be underselling some of his skills there, but I think he's
I'm not waiting 10 years for a turkey from anybody.
Yeah, he does make a really good point, though.
Yeah, exactly. And some of this is communications. The government needs to do a better job explaining, I think, connecting the dots between some of these longer term investments and things that it is working towards, and the impact on jobs and things that are the pain that is going to be felt here in the coming months if we don't see some relief on the tariffs on steel and aluminum and that type of thing. In Winnipeg, for example, this week, drove past a parking lot, tons of buses that are ordered by companies and cities in the US aren't crossing the border. They're piling up in parking lots in Winnipeg, and there's other examples in the farm equipment space as well, and paint, and Southern Ontario for sure is feeling that in the auto sector as well. So some of those things, there isn't 10 years of time to wait for this turkey to get cooked. It's there's got to be some at least an appetizer in the meantime, and the government needs to communicate that.
Yeah, and I wrote a column, post webinar, and then Tyler and I talked on the phone. And, when you feel the spirit and it moves you, you just go and you start writing. And I did that. And I think I'm being fair but critical in terms of, Tyler, big promises, a different Canada. Canada needs to think big, but we're 6 months in and there's a lot riding on this budget early November. I am concerned at which the speed we are not pushing forward on, especially if we're trying to increase our competitiveness. A part of being competitive is also doing that with speed.
Yeah, and first, I think I do a lot better with these food metaphors than I do with the sports metaphors you guys get into sometimes. But there is something to be said for the fact that as much as you don't want to take 10 years to cook the turkey, you can't cook the turkey in 20 minutes either. It does take time to get it right. I think some things that we heard during the webinar, we heard from Greg from Crop Life spoke about how underwhelmed they've been with the regulatory reform package, that did not meet their expectations that are there. We heard Lauren Kennedy from Chicken Farmers of Canada talk about the underwhelming response that was received when a relatively unprecedented group of ag associations came together to write to the Prime Minister to say, we want you to make ag a priority. And I think that we heard from Lauren Martin from the Meat Council talk about kind of the challenges that they faced on issues, really critical issues like the temporary foreign worker program, getting people to understand how critically important it is and getting good action on ag issues. And so I think that there was this theme where, as much as Kelvin talks about communications, what you need first is action. And we're not seeing the action yet that we need to get. And so I think that does make their communications harder. And that may be one of the reasons, going back to the FBT meeting that we talked about last week, that we get kind of a word salad in the communique, is that the action just isn't there to underpin it. And hopefully at some point in time this fall, the government fully finds its feet underneath it and starts to get things done, because that's really what we need. And if they start to get things done, they can do some of that communicating that Kelvin thinks they need to do.
I know I've had feedback on the column where it's been like, yep, well said, agree. And, I'm concerned about this as well. Some of those people are just, they're observing. Some of the people are, they've been in the inside of some of this. But there's also people, Kelvin, that are like, you know what? Canada needs to move as slow is okay. We got to get it right. And to me, that's exactly what I'm saying is the problem. We're going to fall into that trap of let just paralysis by analysis, and let's let perfection be the enemy of progress.
Well, there are times where moving slow can be an advantage, and this is an argument that we've made that I've made in terms of the approach to trade talks with the U.S. In terms of not rushing that. But but other areas, certainly, yeah, speed is a necessity, and we like our committees and we like our working groups, and that was one of the outcomes, or one of the requests that I know was discussed in this canola meeting between industry and the Prime Minister and Saskatchewan Premier this week, was that the federal government form a working group to better understand the canola market and what's happening as a result of the Chinese tariffs. And to me, there too, we tend to go to committee and that type of thing, and maybe there's cultural change that needs to happen. And the Prime Minister, I think, is somebody that is trying to make that change. There's a lot of stuff running through Mark Carney himself individually right now in his brain in terms of policy change, but he can't do it all by himself. He needs the culture to change underneath him and around him and right through the bureaucracy. And that's a challenge, I think, that I'm not sure one person, even if they're the Prime Minister, can change.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, I think that point around the culture needs to change cannot be underlined enough. Right, and it's a political culture around the role that agriculture plays. Again, we had a discussion about what does it take to get agriculture seen as a strategic sector. We need to have that awareness change, and I think that is a cultural issue. It's a cultural issue around the action that we need to see. Again, I think that there was talk in the webinar about one of the things that's changed is ministers are accountable, right? That there's an expectation that the Prime Minister has that his minister is going to do things. That is a different dynamic than what we've seen. And then we need to see the culture change underneath the minister so that there's action that's there. But there's also a culture that needs to change outside of government, and that's inside farm organizations and associations and in this broader space where we need to demand results, and we need to be doing our parts to hold governments accountable when they don't do what we need to do. And again, I think we heard a bit of that discussion that relationships need to be maintained, and sometimes you've got to kind of work behind the scenes. You can't do all of that out in the public. But I think that that's part of that cultural change that Kelvin outlined is we on the outside need to do a better job of saying, this is what our expectation is. This is how we're going to hold you, the minister, accountable so that you deliver the results that, one, he says he wants to deliver, but two, he's not actually delivering yet.
Yeah. A little bit more. And part of this gets to the culture of risk adversity, right? And so if you are paralyzed by the fear that a decision is going to not work out the way you want, then you get into delays and bogged down by the process and analyzing from every single angle, and you become comfortable in just doing nothing because you were trying to find the best solution. And hey, you can go through all. We all know this. If you when you're running your farm business, right? You can have all the planning, you can have all the best strategy, you can have all the best tools, and there's a variable that's thrown your way, and the best laid plan doesn't work out the way you thought. That happens every single day. But you know what? You fail fast. You put on your shoes the next morning and you take on the day and try to, show flexibility and resilience and make it work. And I think we got to find more of that instead of sort of this entrapment that we're in here right now. Go ahead.
We're pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
And if we aren't comfortable, then we don't like to move. And I think this is we're pointing the finger at government here and bureaucracy.
Oh, no, it's us too. It is Canadians.
It's also our farm groups. Some of our farm groups could be coming forward with more specific solutions that government could implement. It would help the government in terms of giving specific to-dos, but we can't come to agreement in the farm group level as to what those priorities should be, that type of thing. So, yeah. And to me, this is where leadership is required. Good leaders have vision, and they convince people to buy into their vision and help and convince them that it's worth moving from where they are sitting right now to a better position, that there's something better on the horizon. And we need leaders. We need people to convince people to make those types of moves. And I'm not sure we're seeing a lot of that in a lot of places right now either.
Here's the reality. Well, go ahead, Tyler. Go ahead.
And we need to create a space where governments can actually do things and try things and maybe fail at those things and not be crucified either. And let's be honest, we don't have a political world today where that's an option. Again, I think that our farm groups and farm leaders are part of that problem too, where they're not creating the space where they're encouraging governments to try things. But let's be honest, like the political world today does not encourage a government that's that's trying things and experimenting, because as soon as you have a blip of failure, you're hoisted on your petard. And I think that continues to be a challenge in the agriculture space, where we seem to have a bit of a double standard between how we tend to think of conservative governments and how we tend to think of liberal governments from an ideological perspective. I continue to be mystified. The Conservative Party didn't have ag content in its platform, and we've all moved past that. But yet, anytime there's any kind of sign of the Liberals being a little bit shaky on something, we're kind of gone to the ramparts on it. I think we need to figure out that ideological difference and create a better space where this government, we're going to have a Liberal government for a while, it seems, has got more support, more engagement, and more results for agriculture.
I have heard Francis Donald, who's the chief economist with RBC, on a number of different podcasts and news programs this week. Hurley Burley, she was also on Bloomberg Surveillance the other morning. And she talks about opportunity and how there is interest in capital coming to Canada and, what Canada could achieve. And there is opportunity. But here's the reality. You have to seize the opportunity. Otherwise, you might as well just throw it away. And we got to get to that point. We got to move and have the action. We got to take a break. Today's show is brought to you by Phospholutions, the RealAg Issues Panel. We'll be back right after this.
Protect your anhydrous ammonia application earlier than normal this fall. Defend against potential losses and protect your bottom line with new Centuro A-Pro Nitrogen Stabilizer. Patented active ingredient pronitridine offers agronomically effective protection where it matters most, below ground. The new concentrated formulation lowers application rates. Start early with Centuro A-Pro as part of your nitrogen management plan. Contact your local retailer or visit centuro.ca for more information today.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
RealAg Radio today is brought to you by Phospholutions. Make sure you go to phospholutions.com and check out RhizoSorb, which is redefining what growers expect from phosphate fertilizer. Again, that is phospholutions.com. Okay, we got a really great RealAg Issues panel today. Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, as well as Tyler McCann of CAPI. I found my piece of paper I threw across the room, and I brought it back to my desk. Tyler, you wanted to talk about opportunity.
Yeah, you ended that last segment, Shaun, talking about opportunity, and it was great to see this week in the Globe and Mail Arlene Dickinson, one of Canada's most kind of famous voices these days, talking about agriculture and agri-food and talking about the need for Canada to show up, talking about how the world kind of wants what we've got. And we're pretty pleased that Arlene has agreed to come to CAPI's event that we're hosting in Ottawa, October 1st and 2nd. And so if people want to hear leaders like Arlene talk about the things Canada needs to do to seize and deal with the risk that we're facing, to seize the opportunities that are in front of us, please go to CAPI's website and register for our event. We look forward to having everyone join us. The discounted registration ends today. So if you're listening on Friday, head on over and register. And again, I think it is great to hear her talking about the fact that, look, we need Canada to treat agriculture as a strategic sector. We need to modernize the Food Inspection Agency. We need to back entrepreneurs. We need to address transportation bottlenecks, and we need to invest in processing. I think that these are critical actions that we need to see more action on, and it's good to see Arlene calling that out. And we're excited to have her in Ottawa on the 2nd of October.
At what point do we so this whole idea of people recognizing that agriculture is a major contributor to the economy and all the messaging around that, at what point do we sort of realize that however we've been trying to convince people of this, the fact it's taking so long to convince people of it and get them to recognize it, maybe we need to look in the mirror and realize that maybe the problem is us. I don't like this. This just feels like we could go back 4 years, 5 years, and we're saying the same stuff.
I agree, but I think one of the differences is, again, in this case, Arlene's not just saying make Canada or make agriculture strategic priority. She's saying here's a list of actions that we need to do. And I think even if you look at what the farm groups did this summer with their letter, they weren't as prescriptive in their actions around what government needs to do as Arlene was in the Globe this week. And I think that there is this sense that I think one, the time is different. The world is in a different place. The landscape has changed. There is an opportunity for agriculture now. And I think that we do need this kind of reality that if we can't get our act together as an agriculture sector with our clear list of actions, then maybe we do need somebody like Arlene to kind of do the work for us, because this is an issue that agriculture can agree on. Here's what we're looking for instead.
Kelvin, you know what I look forward to? For all those years, I had the Barton Report drinking game, where every time somebody mentioned the Barton Report at a farm meeting, it was like, drink it, baby. Now it's the Dickinson drinking game. We're going to hear this all winter. Remember, Arlene Dickinson said, and so there you go. We need new fun activity.
Oh, sorry. I want to get on this because I have criticized the Barton Report lots, and I have often said that one of the problems in agriculture is that we really like it when other people talk about us and tell us how great we are. I have for sure said that, but I think that the solution is agriculture needs to get its act together. But I think what we saw this summer with this letter, and we talked about it again on the webinar, people should check that out on our YouTube channel, was that groups couldn't get their act together. Groups haven't been able to agree on here's what the list is. And so if farm groups aren't going to do that work, Shaun, somebody else needs to.
Kelvin, you know who gets their act together? The PMRA. So we saw this week, PMRA released, they started a consultation. It goes from now till I think November 1st. Looking at a potential ban of dicamba as applies to tolerant soybeans. So the reaction, I will admit here, when I first heard about this story last Friday, when PMRA updated some of the registrants, I was expecting much more of a reaction from some of the audience. That has not been the case. There's some people very upset, concerned what road this is leading us down. And there's kind of been some apathy towards it, which has been fairly interesting. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it would draw a bigger reaction as well, and maybe and I think we have seen maybe the strongest reaction to this from my neck of the woods here in southern Manitoba, where extend soybeans and the dicamba option has become real useful in fighting weeds that are glyphosate resistant. We maybe don't grow as many sensitive crops as they grow in Ontario in terms of horticulture and IP beans and non-GMO beans and those types of crops that are grown beside dicamba-tolerant beans. I don't think anybody's surprised that PMRA is tightening restrictions due to some of the issues. There hasn't been nearly as much issue with drift and movement of this herbicide through volatilization as there has been in the U.S., but I don't think anybody's surprised that they would tighten the rules. But the fact that they went with a ban or are proposing a ban on in-crop application, to me, they have way oversimplified this. There are way more creative middle options that they could have taken in terms of restrictions or creating maybe an app that factors in a whole bunch of different variables, including weather and forecast and different conditions, what your tank mix is, all those types of things, crop staging, something that would factor in all these variables to pull back the risk to a tolerable level. We don't need this is taking a tool away that is quite useful, especially in parts of the country, and I think they've overshot here in terms of basically following maybe some of the headlines coming out of the U.S. in terms of an overreaction, and now we have this consultation period. Hopefully they pull it back after that, but we'll have to wait and see, and it creates this uncertainty. And another factor here is the introduction of Enlist or 2,4-D tolerant soybeans on the market over the last number of years, and those systems, of course, not being compatible with the impact of the herbicide on the other and that type of thing. So that's a complicating factor here too as well. And so, it'll be certainly this comment period. I think we'll get some definite submissions, a bunch of people expressing their opinions. We'll have to see, though, whether Health Canada takes that into account in before issuing a final decision. And that's one thing, too. We don't have any timeline. They're refusing to give us any timeline as to when a change could take effect. Don't expect it for 2026, though. If they do make a change, it likely won't affect the 2026 growing season.
I got a text here from a listener who believes we need to educate, not regulate. And he said, we take a course every 5 years to understand the risks of applying anhydrous ammonia. I'd be willing to take a course for chemistries that revolatize and have secondary drift in the same way. A course could cover how revolatize, why do we keep on saying that? I can't say that word, how it works and why the temperature and timing is important, and really teach farmers what to watch out for. I just hate to see good options taken away due to poor product education. Here's what I also wonder about, okay, is if you look at the neonic, how PMR handled the neonic ban, and even front-to-package labeling when it came to beef and pork. This idea that, here's an idea. Let's let the consultation begin. And what we may do is, seems like to the industry like, whoa, we're taking a major leap. Then the consultation happens, we get some more information, then it gets pulled back. And this reality, all it does is drive a further wedge between one side, activists, and the other side being the industry, because the activists say, ooh, PMRA in the pocket of, the big beef industry, or in the pocket of, Crop Life Canada and things like. I think it just drives a further wedge between these two sides, Tyler.
But it is a good example of why that you don't get that turkey cooked right away. It does take time. You do need consultations, and we do have this track record of PMRA proposing one thing and then making a very different decision once it's gone through the consultation process. But I think at the end of the day, there's this issue where what probably drives a lot of this are people inside these regulatory agencies, whether it's PMRA or CFIA, that don't know as much about the dynamics that they're there, that come up with proposed decisions and then rely on the consultations to get information. I think that if you look around the world, often we look at the United States, but around the world, there is just more engagement between the regulators and the regulated party, so that when the regulators go to make a decision, it's a more informed decision than what we get in Canada. In Canada, we get these, again, proposed decisions that often lack a sophistication or nuance that we see other places, that gets corrected through the consultation process. And you could avoid that if we had regulators that were better informed and better equipped before they made the decision in the first place. This is the type of thing that we expect to see changed based on the political direction of Mark Carney and Minister MacDonald, and yet we just haven't seen that change yet. And sooner or later, we need to start to see results if people are going to have faith that they actually believe in the regulatory reform that they talk about.
Kelvin?
Meanwhile, the damage is done when they come out with an extreme proposal like this. Then the damage is done in terms of optics and creating that fear in the people who are paying attention. It's not all that different from the Maha report situation in the U.S. too, where you come out strong and then pull back, but then those accusations of being in the pocket of corporate interests, that type of thing, come out. So, yeah, we'll have to see how this plays out. There is a few other angles to this too, but yeah, we can talk.
Well, go ahead quickly. 30 seconds. No, that's fine.
What I would just say is that I get very nervous about making any comparisons between something happening in Canada and the Maha report in the United States. So Kelvin may want to link those two things together, but I do kind of am thankful that we've got what we've got in Canada.
Well, so far.
I know what I was going to say. It's just that the message this sends, and Tyler alluded to this, the message that this decision by PMRA this week sends is opposite to what Carney and Ag Minister MacDonald have been sending in terms of PMRA, cutting red tape, getting government out of the way, that type of thing. Here they are taking a major tool out of the toolbox for many farmers.
Absolutely. And I've said before, weed resistance is a candle burning at both ends. You got old products being taken away, hard to bring new products onto the market. Meanwhile, weed resistance continues to expand and our tools on the ends continues to shrink. Weeds are winning this battle for sure. Hey, that's all the time we have today. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Stay tuned for all of you listening on the RealAg Radio podcast for the bonus segment. And everybody have yourselves a great weekend. Thanks for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to the bonus. You should have been here during the break. Okay, we got Kelvin Heppner, RealAgriculture, as well as Tyler McCann of CAPI. And hey, Kelvin, I have a couple things we did not cover in the show. What comes to mind for you?
One is President Trump's proposal that corporate world in North America go to 6-month reporting of earnings instead of quarterly reporting, which I think there's a lot of good arguments for it in terms of the short-term thinking that permeates a lot of our boardrooms and executive suites, with where decisions are made that compromise the long-term health of a company or business in favor of the next quarterly earnings targets that need to be hit. Short-term thinking, I think, is a bane to our society in many ways. Corporately, even personally, a lot of our health issues, I think, are short-term. There's a short-term versus long-term thinking aspect, strong argument for more long-term thinking. But I think there is a huge question mark here around the timing of this when the U.S. economy looks like it could be faltering and it looks bad. It looks like a leader a political leader who doesn't want bad news to be shared and he wants it covered up. It's kind of thing. So to me, there's an optics issue around doing it at this time.
Yeah, I heard about this on Bloomberg. When we don't cover like these kind of issues, but I gotta admit, I went down a total rabbit hole investigating this and looking at it. Tyler, did you hear about the story this week?
I did, but given that kind of all of the stock that I own are livestock, this doesn't have direct impact on me. But again, I was a bit surprised, Shaun, to hear Kelvin like on the side of decreased corporate transparency and giving corporations more time to hide their results. I would have thought that he would say, no, we need to get this we need to maintain the transparency.
I think there are creative ways you can maintain transparency while having lower compliance costs. There might be better ways of doing that.
So the U.S. would not be like North America is kind of on a bit of an island here. So Canada and the U.S. have quarterly reporting. The London Stock Exchange, the Frankfurt Exchange, Europe are semi-annually. So we're actually more of the anomaly. In the research that I did, in Europe, what they do is they have semi-annual reporting of earnings, but they have quarterly guidance. And so it's like that's how they manage it. So I think, at first glance, there was like this, whoa, like, just it was something that Trump said. And so that's the reaction that happens on both sides of the aisle. But they're actually, I've heard a number of different debates for and against this. It is a lot more complex than maybe at first glance you think. In corporate boardrooms, though, there would be compliance costs are huge. And a lot of times we think about like the largest of companies, like the Fortune 500, but there are a lot of small, medium-sized companies that have to report quarterly that just trade over the counter. They are deemed as a public company. Their shares are not traded necessarily like on a New York Stock Exchange or a NASDAQ or the London Stock Exchange. They are traded on more of a provincial or a state level sort of exchange. Huge compliance costs. And so this would be pretty popular, I think, in a lot of boardrooms for just the sake of the cost side, not even thinking, oh, now we can sneak around. That can work in both. Some companies that are on the up would be like, man, this would be a disadvantage to our stock price potentially but then if we're able to provide the guidance, that maybe would help out. But maybe people want more on the earnings. It really is a bit of a complex issue.
And two exact same companies, if one reports more often, there should be lower risk in investing in that company, so there should be a premium on their share value potentially. So there could be some direction from shareholders or stockholders in terms of companies' approaches to this.
Yeah. Tyler, what else did we miss today?
I'm surprised that Kelvin didn't touch on this, but interest rates went down this week. Speaking of kind of that economic kind of landscape that's there. Again, like good news, bad news. Good news, interest rates went down. Bad news, they went down because the economy doesn't look so hot and that there's concern. And so, I think it foreshadows lots of kind of challenging dynamics on the horizon. And once again, we take to the federal budget and seeing how the federal government responds. It will be interesting to see how that reacts to what the Bank of Canada is trying to do.
Kelvin, what were your thoughts on what you heard from the Bank of Canada or the Fed this week?
I don't think there were a lot of surprises. Maybe that's why I didn't think, or why this wasn't top of mind in terms of something that we should be talking about, because I think this was largely expected. And there's some experts, some of this is beyond how I understand the bond market and that type of thing, that show that the Main Street interest rates are not going to drop as much as what the central bank rates are being cut. So unfortunately, that means that we won't see kind of that same cut in terms of mortgage rates locally, that type of thing.
Yeah, and there also is this weirdness. One of the factors, I actually heard the lead economist at BMO say this morning on an interview. Most of the world of the G7 is done rate cutting, or is through the big bulk of it, where the U.S. is just starting. And so like that's a weird dynamic when we look at the yield curves and things like that. There was a lot of criticism of Fed Chair Powell this week in terms of sort of like the mishmash of words that he used in describing their decision to make this first cut. Of course, his term is ending in May of 26, and so the guidance that he and commentary he put around it is probably doesn't carry as much weight as maybe that normally would, as there's full expectation he will not be the Fed chair after May. It looks like they're going to cut twice more in the U.S. between now and the end of the year. In Canada, Kelvin, there was more cuts coming in Canada potentially too, right?
Yes, I don't have it right in front of me here, but I believe, they were talking about potentially more before the end of the year here too, or that is the expectation. But I think slightly less movement than what the U.S. is expected to do.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it does show itself in some of the operating loan interest rates, especially on the variable side. We're at a time where farm profitability is a real challenge, right? And so people could use some of that relief for sure. Tyler, you and I. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
This is another classic example of short-term thinking. This is where presidents put pressure on central bank governors to lower interest rates because they want the economy heated up in the short term during their political term, at the cost of inflation down the road, and inflation is damaging all around. So there's that's short-term thinking. The political pressure on central banks is an example again of what I was referring to earlier, with short-term thinking being a bane to our society these days.
Yeah, big issue in the UK as well on that, for sure. Tyler, you and I have been talking a little bit off air about farm programming. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And I mentioned farm profitability related to ad hoc assistance. We're seeing a big push, highly likely in the back half of the year, once we get past October, that there's going to be, and we get what some of the yields are, there's probably going to be a big, I would say, bipartisan push for economic aid in the U.S. We hear some of those same things being said in Canada, maybe related to the canola issue as an example. That's a topic with a lot of nuance and a lot of complexity, but it's something we should be chatting about more.
Yeah, and I think it's something that at times there's a temptation to look south of the border and think, boy, it would be nice if we saw these bailouts the way that U.S. farmers are getting. But I think that there's a real element of, like, you got to be careful what you wish for. You've got to understand the difference between what's happening in the U.S. and Canada. And, I think that there's a big question around the sustainability of the cycle that U.S. farmers are on today, where, look, things get a little bit bad and the government rushes with a fairly significant bailout, and that may make things worse, and they need a bigger bailout at the end to understand kind of how much of these pressures are actually being caused by the U.S. government itself. And again, I think that where possible, we need to put more of a focus on how do you solve these root problems. And again, I think in the Canadian context, there are some lessons learned around, if you look at the drivers of that farm profitability concern and the solutions that are there for it. I think that we need to take a kind of a much more sophisticated approach. We need to not duplicate what they're doing in the U.S., but we need to learn from what they're doing in the U.S.
We were talking about this on AgriTalk earlier today, and more, I don't know, maybe I'm paying more attention. I'm hearing more questions about, is that the right decision to have some sort of ad hoc program? And there was, during the show, there was a listener that sent Chip a text, and it was around, I'm a small farm. I think the guy said he was a mechanic in town, but he also farms. Has off-farm income, and he brought up the point. A lot of these ad hoc programs are it throws money into the system, and it's actually a barrier for entry for new entrants into the industry or smaller farms looking to expand, which is, I think that's an angle that probably isn't discussed enough as well, Kelvin.
I tried bringing this up a couple of weeks ago, and you guys didn't want to talk about the possibility of farms failing, and there needs to be life. It comes with death, and death brings new life, kind of thing. That cycle happens in business as well, and that's how opportunities come for new growth. But that's a difficult topic to cover and sensitive. Certainly, nobody wants to talk about those types of things. You know
what Chip brought up? He said, and I can't remember the year. There was freedom to farm. What there wasn't was freedom to fail.
Exactly.
Was brought up.
And I guess what I wonder about increasingly when you look at what's happening in the United States is, again, whether or not this is supercharging that cycle. Rather than having kind of ongoing a little bit of kind of death every year, you get into this space where there's an epidemic of failures at once because you get to this cliff edge and it comes off. And I'm often critical of our farm programs in Canada and their ineffectiveness as a risk management tool. I've talked about that a lot on this show, but again, I'm not sure that I think that what the U.S. is doing is the solution. And I think, again, in the canola context, we've got to learn some lessons about the challenges that come with what the U.S. is doing. And I think if you look at kind of that dynamic that's playing out between the canola industry and canola farmers and the government, I think that we've got to be a lot more thoughtful about what we think that the solution actually is to get through that.
The NCGA, the National Corn Growers Association, had a survey they released this week. 80% of farmers think ag is either in or is on the brink of crisis. Very staggering, Kelvin.
Yeah, I'm curious too. We this week, just the last couple of days now, we saw Secretary Rawlins talk about using tariff revenue again as to fund a support package. I'm curious how they're going to make that work, because we heard from J.T. Thompson last week or the week before saying he didn't see a way that protocols allowed for that. My understanding is this would require congressional approval or the change of legislation somewhere to transfer funds from the general tariff revenue into farm support payments, or it would require the CCC again, and our understanding is the CCC is depleted. So I don't know, Shaun, is there any talk out there as to how what Rawlins is talking about could potentially be executed?
Well, Senator Grassley was on AgriTalk, I think it was on Monday, and he said, this is being discussed behind the scenes. I think there's a couple things. One, it's based on people I've talked to, Rawlins was way out ahead of herself. This is being talked about, but she's way out in front of it. Should have not talked about it to the Financial Times like she did on that trip to the UK that she accompanied President Trump on. You can see though, like, senators are going to go home next week. They're on break next week. They come back a day before the potential government shutdown. So they're going to return. They're going to go back to their district, and what they're going to hear is, we need money. And so, as much as we could talk about the damage this potentially does and what the consequences are, they're going to come back to DC and say, we got to find some money. Because I heard this from all the people across my region. Curious how the potential government shutdown and the push for the continuing resolution, how that impacts finding the money for a potential farm program as they try to do some appropriations. So that is kind of fascinating to me. When it comes to the U.S., the farmer has a voice. And so there will be support on both sides of the aisle, no matter the long-term consequences. We can argue about whether it's right or wrong. I'm fully into that. I agree. I'm concerned too. But the reality is it's probably going to happen no matter where the money comes from. The other piece I don't think I mentioned as I talk in a circle here is the fact we're still waiting for the Supreme Court ruling on those IEPA tariffs. And so that may be a factor as well. They can't do anything until that ruling is actually provided as well. So, yeah.
But Shaun, is there any discussion about how much of the problem is that, again, what were corn acres up this year? 5% from last year? We're
up to 96.8 or whatever it is. Yeah.
Like at what point in time is the problem that these programs, these in particular, these payments that are coming out are wreaking havoc on markets, and that kind of that orderly transition that would come with the fact that prices are lower is disrupted, and we're not seeing kind of that downward pressure on acres. Like,
but corn demand is strong. So there's more to. Okay, so we had Chip Flory on the show earlier this week. Corn demand is very strong. That is not the problem. Now, the yield potentially, if we're going to buck off, a 186 plus yield, then that, supply is a bit of a problem based on the acre increase and the yield potential. Now, if we're down in where StoneX thinks now, where we could be in the 179 category, then that changes some of the world balance sheet. One of the things that is driving corn acres higher, Tyler, is the fact that some of the other options really suck. And so if you look at the P&L of the crop complex across the U.S., and you just don't think about the Midwest. Yes, in the Midwest, it's all about the corn and the beans. Nothing else exists. That is a factor. But if you get outside of that corn belt and you get into the fringe and you look at some of the challenges that sorghum growers have, that the rice grower has, and the cotton grower has, that is pulling acres out of those crops, and it is going in because it's going into corn, because it's less of a loss forecast than a $400 an acre loss in cotton. The rising cotton loss sheet is a real problem that is increasing that corn acre.
But that is that space where you get into, there should be how do you get a more thoughtful approach to what does long-term planning look like in these spaces, right? And I mean, cotton, I'm by no means an expert and have much of an understanding of the cotton market, but what I do understand is that we're not using as much cotton as we used to. We've got huge competition from Brazil in that space as they ramp up their production. And again, this is one of the tough challenges that we get into from time to time in agriculture, is that maybe we need to look at what does kind of what's that long-term signal that should be being sent, and how do we adjust and take that into account? And it is tough, and it is difficult, and these are challenging moments at times as you look at maybe we need to produce less cotton than we used to, but again, it just what I see from when I look at what's happening in the United States is that isn't the part of the discussion that's happening, and that's a missing piece of the equation.
Well, and it can't blame a producer that is, sitting in Tennessee and they look at the losses and do I take a $400 an acre loss, or do I switch into corn and maybe lose 135? Like that's a good business decision, right? So you can't. And in cotton,
individually good business decisions, overall policy-wise poor decisions that are distorting markets and dragging this out and potentially creating a bigger cliff. And unfortunately, it means that when things do break, there will likely be even more consolidation and less individual farms on the landscape, that type of thing, than if things were allowed to break in smaller ways. Often.
And I don't blame any producer for making these decisions. Right, farmers are probably doing what's for the best of them. Again, what I'm blaming is a policy environment that is making a bad situation worse.
Well, and also, and Canada does this too, is like where we do have domestic options that could help us. Like, for example, in the U.S., there's becoming increased scrutiny and thought that there's not going to be year-round E15. Like, there's an example where if there was year-round E15, that takes care of some of that corn supply, especially if we're in the higher 180s. There's the policy around 45Z and the lack of clarity on that. We may not see resolution on that until the back half of next year, which is insanity. Like, we talk about moving slow. My good God, like, we've been talking about 45Z and having clarity on that forever, it feels like. I would like to go back and track when we first started talking about that.
But again, that creates a different dynamic of policy risk. I think in the Canadian context, we often talk about policy risk as creating instability, uncertainty in the market, kind of being imposed on farmers. But I think if you are growing crops for a market that exists because of government, that policy risk is just more of like a more legitimate risk in my mind than what we see in the Canadian context, right? That is the challenge that comes with a market that is underpinned on the things that government does. Then you are at the risk of being at the whim of government and potential changes that are there. And I think that there's a balance around using government mandates to create conditions that use demand, but it is I mean, it's not the perfect situation either. There needs to be more of a balance around where is the natural home for these commodities, and how do we kind of create a space where producers can grow them and produce them profitably, and not be at the risk of governments or something else, again, wreaking havoc on what that profitability looks like.
Because Tyler was in full promo mode earlier, Kelvin, it's time for us to do some promo. So I was on the Damian Mason podcast, The Business of Agriculture, and we talk about some of these issues, trade and domestic use policy, and some of the impact that China is having, and what kind of the future of some of these acres look like. So encourage everybody to check that out. It's The Business of Agriculture with Damian Mason. It is on his YouTube channel. I think we're also posting it at RealAgriculture.com. As well. Damien was a guest on the show here, probably going back about a month, and we had a really good conversation on one of our Tuesday features. So he thinks he's got some interesting ideas, and
he's more pessimistic than a lot of people, I'd say, out there in terms of.
I really enjoyed it.
Demand cliff on the horizon, potentially, something like that.
He's a great speaker. He and honestly has a very strong fondness as well for the Canada-U.S. relationship as well. Okay, guys, we better wrap it up. We got to go. We got things to do. Really do appreciate it. I always enjoy the bonus. Appreciate you guys' patience and willingness to do it. Kelvin, I'm sure there's a great CFL slate for you this weekend.
Always this time of year for sure. And yeah, go Bombers, go Blue Jays. Lots to do.
First in the American League, 3-game lead on the Yankees, and let's go. Come on, Tyler.
Injuries.
Yeah, the bullpen's a little taxed. So we got 6 starting pitchers to try to relieve some of that pressure off the bullpen. Tyler, what do you got planned this weekend?
Hopefully get a tractor going that's broken. But Shaun, I feel like you did a plug at the end. I'm going to do one more plug. If you people that are listening aren't following CAPI on all of the socials and all that stuff, they should do it. They could see that webinar that we did this week. That was great. Really good context for the policy landscape this fall in Ottawa. And they could get the details on how to register for our event on the 1st and 2nd of October in Ottawa.
Make sure you're following Tyler on TikTok, Instagram.
Oh, not on either of those, Shaun. Not hip enough for that.
Good stuff. Okay, everybody, have yourselves a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in to RealAg Radio, and make sure you send us your feedback, shaney@realagriculture.com.